She didn't notice the time I gave, only the time I took back. The moment I realized something was deeply wrong wasn't during a fight. It wasn't when voices were raised. It wasn't even when tears showed up. It was when she looked at me and said, "So you're really choosing them over me tonight?" Not yelling, not crying, just quiet disappointment. And in that moment, something inside me cracked, because them meant my friends. Friends I hadn't seen in weeks. Friends I barely talked to anymore. And tonight meant one evening, out of 7. I remember standing there, keys in my hand, frozen, trying to calculate my own life in percentages. How much time had I already given? How much more was I expected to give? And at what point would there be nothing left of me to give at all? That was the night I realized, no matter how much of myself I offered, it would never be enough. But I didn't know that yet. Not fully. At that point, I still believed this was just a misunderstanding, a rough patch, something couples work through. I didn't know this story would end the way it did. Let me rewind. When we first started dating, everything felt intense in a good way. She wanted to see me all the time. I wanted to see her too. We texted constantly. We made plans weeks in advance. Weekends were ours by default. I thought this is what commitment looks like. I showed up, consistently. I hung out with her almost every day. We went out every weekend. I planned surprise dates a few times a month. Concerts, late-night drives, new restaurants, spontaneous trips. I stayed over 4 or 5 nights a week. Sometimes more. If I'm being honest, about 90% of my free time belonged to her. And I didn't resent it. Not at first. I liked making her happy. I liked being the person she felt safe with. But slowly, quietly, the other 10% started to matter more than the 90. Started small. If I said I needed a night to myself, she'd get quiet, not angry, just withdrawn. If I mentioned playing Xbox with friends, her mood would shift. She wouldn't say, "Don't go." She didn't have to. Her disappointment did the talking for her. And every time, I felt guilty, so I canceled, or I rushed through it, or I promised I'd make it up to her later. I started negotiating my own rest. Okay, I'll play for an hour, then come over. Okay, I'll go, but I'll text the whole time. Okay, I'll skip this one. At some point, I stopped asking myself what I wanted at all. And here's the part that still messes with my head. She never complained about the nights we spent together. She never acknowledged the weekends, the effort, the consistency. What she noticed, what she felt, was the time I didn't give her. That 10%. It was like the 90 didn't count anymore. And that's when the resentment started creeping in. Not loud resentment, quiet resentment. The kind that shows up as exhaustion, as irritability, as a strange sense of shrinking. I remember one night in particular. I had just finished a long week at work, mentally drained, socially empty. All I wanted was a night alone, not to escape her, just to reset myself. I told her gently, "I think I'm just gonna stay in tonight." Her face fell. "So you don't want to see me?" I tried to explain. "That's not what I said. I just need some time to myself." She nodded, but her eyes said something else. And later that night, I found myself staring at my ceiling, alone, feeling like I had done something wrong. That's when I started asking questions I had never asked before. Is it selfish to want time alone? Is it normal to miss your friends? Is it wrong to want parts of your life that don't include your partner? Or is something else happening here? I didn't have answers yet. All I knew was that I felt increasingly unseen. Not unloved, but unseen. Seen only for what I failed to give. Never for what I consistently showed up with. And the worst part, I started doubting myself. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe I should want to spend every free moment with her. Maybe this is just what love requires. That internal conflict. That constant self-questioning. That's where the real damage began. Because once you start negotiating your own needs away, you stop knowing where your boundaries are. And when boundaries disappear, so does respect. But I didn't realize that yet. At that point, I still thought love meant sacrifice, even when it cost me my sense of self. And I still believed that if I just explained myself better, if I just reassured her more, if I just gave a little more, things would balance out. They didn't. They escalated. And what started as quiet disappointment slowly turned into something heavier. Something that would eventually force me to make a choice I never thought I'd have to make. Between being a good partner and being myself. So let me ask you something before we continue. Have you ever given almost everything to someone, only to be judged for what little you kept for yourself? And if so, how long did it take before you started disappearing inside that relationship? Looking back now, the warning signs didn't arrive screaming. They arrived smiling, wrapped in affection, disguised as devotion. When we first met, her intensity felt flattering. She wanted to know everything about me, my schedule, my friends, my routines. At the time, I thought, she just really cares. She asked questions like, "What are you doing tonight? Who are you with? How long will you be gone?" And I answered happily, because that's what you do when you like someone. But slowly, the questions stopped feeling curious and started feeling evaluative, like my answers were being graded. Early on, she told me something that stuck with me. "I've been hurt before, so I need a lot of reassurance." I nodded, because that sounded reasonable. Who hasn't been hurt? Who doesn't want reassurance? So I gave it. Freely. I reassured her with words, with time, with presence. If she felt insecure, I stayed longer. If she felt anxious, I canceled plans. If she needed validation, I gave it immediately. At first, it felt like love in action. But what I didn't realize was that reassurance, when it's never enough, stops being kindness and starts becoming labor. She'd text me while I was out with friends. "Are you having fun?" And if I didn't reply fast enough, another message would follow. "Guess you're busy." Then, did I do something wrong? I'd feel my stomach tighten, not because I didn't want to reply, but because I knew what silence meant. Silence meant consequences. So I started anticipating them. I'd preemptively explain, preemptively apologize, preemptively promise more time later, without realizing it. I was managing her emotions before they even appeared. And the strange thing was, she wasn't cruel about it. She never said, "You're not allowed to see your friends." She didn't have to. She just made it emotionally expensive. If I went out, she'd be distant afterward. If I stayed home, she'd be warm again. My nervous system learned quickly. Connection equals safety. Independence equals tension. So I chose safety. I didn't see my friends much anymore. Not because I didn't care about them, but because I was tired of repairing emotional fallout. That's when my world started shrinking. And I didn't notice at first, because I was busy maintaining the relationship. We were together constantly. texting all day, seeing each other most nights. From the outside, it looked ideal. People would say, "You two are always together," and she loved hearing that. But I started feeling like, if I wasn't available, I was failing. If I needed space, I was selfish. If I wanted time alone, I was neglectful. I remember one conversation clearly. I told her I missed gaming with my friends, just casually, not as a complaint. She laughed softly. "So you'd rather play video games than spend time with me?" I tried to explain. "It's not instead of, it's just sometimes." She nodded, but the message landed anyway. I stopped bringing it up after that. That's how it happens. Not with ultimatums, but with subtle conditioning. You learn what causes tension, and you avoid it. Over time, I noticed something unsettling. She never asked if I was tired or overwhelmed. She only asked if I was distant. My exhaustion didn't matter, only how it affected her. That's when reassurance stopped being mutual. I was constantly proving my love, but rarely receiving space to exist as myself. And still, I told myself this was normal, because everyone says relationships require compromise. But no one tells you what happens when compromise only flows one way. I began to feel like a background character in my own life. My schedule revolved around her moods. My energy revolved around her needs. My sense of worth revolved around her approval. And yet, she still felt like I wasn't doing enough. That's the part that messes with you the most. You give 90% and get criticized for the 10 you keep. Eventually, I started feeling resentful. Not angry, just hollow. I loved her, but I was disappearing. And I didn't know how to say that without sounding cruel. So I stayed quiet, because somewhere along the way, I learned that my needs were optional, and her feelings were urgent. That imbalance, that quiet erosion of self, that's where the real story begins. Because love isn't supposed to make you smaller. There's a moment in every unhealthy dynamic when you stop choosing something freely and start doing it because you're afraid of the reaction if you don't. I didn't notice when that shift happened. I only noticed the weight afterward. By this point, reassurance had become routine. Not a gesture, not affection, a requirement. If I didn't check in enough, she felt ignored. If I checked in too much, she'd say it felt forced. There was no winning, only constant adjustment. I started waking up with a strange pressure in my chest. Not anxiety exactly, more like anticipation. What mood will she be in today? What version of me will be needed today? And slowly, I began filtering my actions through one question. Will this upset her? Not do I want to do this? Not is this good for me? Just that one question. The first real fight about independence happened on a Tuesday. I remember that clearly because Tuesdays used to be my night. Or at least they used to be. I had told her days in advance. I'm going to hang out with the guys Tuesday night. She smiled when I said it. Said okay. Said have fun. I believed her. Tuesday came. I packed up my controller. Texted her before leaving. Heading out now. Her reply came slower than usual. Cool. One word. With a period. My stomach sank. Halfway through the night, my phone buzzed. Are you staying over there late? I answered honestly. Probably a few more hours. Another pause. Then, oh, that was it. No accusation. No argument. Just emotional withdrawal. I felt it immediately. That familiar chill. Suddenly, I wasn't enjoying myself anymore. I kept checking my phone, noticing the silence. And that's when it hit me. Even when she said yes, the cost still came later. When I got home, I called her. She answered, but her voice was distant. "What's wrong?" I asked. She sighed. "I just don't understand why you'd rather be there than with me." Something in me snapped then. Not loudly, but deeply. I tried to explain. "It's not about choosing them over you. It's just one night." Her response was immediate. "If it's just one night, why is it such a big deal to skip it?" That question, that framing, cornered me, because now I had to justify wanting my own life. I felt myself shrinking mid-sentence. "I just need time like that sometimes." She went quiet, then softly, "So I'm too much for you now." That was the turning point, because suddenly the conversation wasn't about independence anymore. It was about her worth, and now I was the villain. I backtracked immediately. "No, that's not what I meant. Of course not." I reassured, over-explained, apologized. And just like that, my boundary evaporated. After that night, I noticed how careful I became. I stopped using words like need, stopped saying alone, stopped saying space. Those words had consequences. Instead, I said things like, "Maybe later, if that's okay, only if you're comfortable." My autonomy became conditional. And here's the part one struggled to admit to myself. I started resenting her, not for wanting closeness, but for making distance feel like betrayal. I felt trapped between two impossible options: abandon myself or hurt someone I loved. And every time I chose myself even a little, I paid for it emotionally. That's when the emotional trigger really took hold. The feeling of injustice. Because no matter how much I gave, it was never counted. Only what I withheld mattered. I started thinking, if someone truly loved me, would they want me smaller or fuller? But those thoughts scared me, because once you question the foundation, everything starts to shake. She sensed the distance growing in me, even though I was still physically present. And she reacted the only way she knew how. More closeness, more checking, more emotional pressure, which only made me pull back more internally. That's the cycle no one warns you about. One person grips tighter, the other starts suffocating, and both feel justified. By the end of that month, I was exhausted, not from loving her, but from managing the relationship. Love shouldn't feel like constant damage control. And yet, I still didn't leave, because I believed something worse was coming if I did. Guilt, blame, being seen as the bad guy. And I wasn't ready for that yet. But the breaking point was getting closer. The argument didn't start with yelling. It started with exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that doesn't show on your face, but settles deep in your bones. I remember sitting across from her on the couch. The TV was on, muted, neither of us watching. She asked a simple question. "Why do you seem so distant lately?" I had rehearsed this moment in my head 100 times. Different versions, different words, but when it finally came, none of them felt safe. I took a breath. "I feel like I don't have space anymore." Her eyes narrowed slightly, not angry, alert. "Space for me?" she asked. And right there, that framing again. Not space in life, not space to breathe, just space from her. I tried to stay calm. No, space to be myself, to do things without feeling guilty. She leaned back, crossed her arms. So now I'm controlling you. The conversation escalated quickly after that. Every attempt I made to explain my feelings was translated into an accusation against her. If I said I needed alone time, she heard rejection. If I said I missed my friends, she heard replacement. If I said I felt overwhelmed, she heard blame. And suddenly, I wasn't talking about my needs anymore. I was defending my character. She started listing everything she did for me. How often I see you. How much time we spend together. How available I always am. As if love were a ledger. And that's when she said something that stopped me cold. If you really loved me, you wouldn't need space. That sentence. That belief. It hit me like a punch to the chest. Because in that moment, I realized something terrifying. We weren't arguing about time, or friends, or schedules. We were arguing about identity. She believed love meant total access, total priority, total merging, and I believed love required two intact people. There was no compromise there. Only one of us could be right. My chest felt tight, my throat dry. I asked quietly, "So what happens to me in that version of love?" She stared at me. "I don't understand why this is so hard for you." And that's when it clicked. She didn't see me struggling. She saw me resisting. I felt something shift inside me then. Not anger, clarity. For the first time, I stopped trying to convince her. I said, "I shouldn't have to prove my love by disappearing." Her face hardened. "So you're saying I'm the problem now?" That word again. Problem. I stood up, my hands shaking. "No, I'm saying this relationship doesn't leave room for me." Silence filled the room. Heavy. Charged. And then she said it. "Well, maybe you're just not ready for real commitment." That was the breaking point. Because I realized something devastating. In her mind, my need for autonomy was immaturity. My desire for balance was selfishness. And my humanity was optional. I sat back down slowly, not defeated, but changed. I saw the pattern clearly now. Every boundary I tried to set was reframed as abandonment. Every need I expressed was treated as an attack. There was no safe way to exist as myself here. And that's when survival mode kicked in. Not survival with her. Survival from this dynamic. The argument ended without resolution. They always did. But something was different this time. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't wondering if I was wrong. I knew. Love shouldn't feel like walking on glass. Love shouldn't punish you for breathing. Love shouldn't require you to shrink. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, not thinking about how to fix things, but whether this relationship was costing me my sense of self. And the answer was clear. I had been surviving, not living, but leaving wasn't simple. After that fight, nothing officially ended. That's the part people don't talk about enough. Most relationships don't collapse in one dramatic moment. They dissolve slowly, quietly, through a series of emotional negotiations. The morning after our argument, she was different, softer, careful, attentive in a way I hadn't seen in a while. She made coffee, sat close to me, touched my arm while we talked, and then she said the words I knew were coming. "I've been thinking about what you said." My chest tightened. Not with hope, but with caution. She told me she understood now. That she didn't mean to make me feel trapped. That she just loved me so much it scared her. She said she'd try to give me more space. Said she didn't want to lose me. And here's the thing that makes this part dangerous. She sounded sincere, not manipulative, not calculated, just afraid. And when someone you care about is afraid, walking away feels cruel. So I stayed. I told myself this was growth, that relationships go through phases, that conflict leads to understanding. For a while, things improved. She didn't text as much when I was out, didn't question my plans immediately, didn't make comments about my friends. And I thought, maybe this is it. Maybe we figured it out. But the tension never fully disappeared. It just went underground. I noticed how she'd sigh quietly when I mentioned plans. How she'd say it's fine, but mean the opposite. How she'd withdraw emotionally instead of confronting me. The guilt came back, not because she asked for more, but because I could feel her disappointment. And disappointment is harder to ignore than anger. I found myself compensating again. If I took one night for myself, I'd give her 2 nights afterward. If I went out with friends, I'd plan an extra date to balance it out. Love became a system of offsets. And slowly, without realizing it, I was back where I started. The promises hadn't changed the core belief. She still believed closeness meant constant availability. And I still needed space to feel like myself. We were incompatible at the level that mattered most. But I wasn't ready to admit that yet, because by then, I was afraid of the story that would be told if I left. That I didn't try hard enough. That I abandoned her. That I chose myself over us. Those narratives haunt you, especially when you're a person who prides yourself on loyalty. There were nights I lay awake thinking, if I just adjust a little more, if I just communicate better, if I just wait it out, maybe it will finally stabilize. But deep down, I knew the truth. No amount of reassurance would ever be enough. Because the fear wasn't about me. It was inside her. And I couldn't fix that. That realization is brutal. Because it means love alone isn't the solution. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. The final straw didn't come as an explosion. It came as a quiet realization one evening. I was sitting alone, controller in my hands. Game paused, and instead of relaxing, I felt anxious. Not because I was doing something wrong, but because I knew what was coming afterward. The emotional bill. That's when it hit me. If even my rest came with consequences. Then this wasn't partnership anymore. It was obligation. I sat there thinking, is this how I want to live? Is this what love is supposed to feel like? And the answer came faster than I expected. No, but leaving meant facing the hardest part yet. Her reaction. The fallout. The final update that changes everything. I didn't wake up one morning suddenly brave. I woke up tired of negotiating my own existence. That's how leaving really begins. Not with courage, but with exhaustion. The kind where your body decides before your mind catches up. I remember sitting in my car after work, engine off, hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing, and thinking, I can't do this for another year. I can't do this for another month. I can't do this for another week. That's when the decision finally settled in. Not loudly, not dramatically, just heavy and certain. I needed to leave, not because she was evil, not because she didn't love me, but because loving her required erasing myself. That night, I went to her place knowing what I was about to do. My heart was racing, not from doubt, from anticipation of the fallout. She could tell immediately something was wrong. You're quiet, she said. I sat down, took a breath. I can't keep doing this. Her face changed instantly. What do you mean? I chose my words carefully, not to protect her feelings anymore, but to finally honor my own. I feel like I'm disappearing in this relationship. She shook her head. No, you're not. You're just scared of commitment. That sentence didn't hurt like it used to, because I no longer believed it. This isn't about commitment, I said. It's about space, and I'm not allowed to have any. Her voice rose. So now I'm suffocating you. There it was again. That reframing. Every boundary became an accusation. I stayed calm. I'm not blaming you. I'm telling you how I feel. She stood up, started pacing. So what? You're just going to walk away after everything I've given you. Guilt tried to claw its way back in. But this time, I didn't let it steer. I gave a lot too, I said quietly. She stopped moving, looked at me like she didn't recognize me. That's not fair. And in that moment, I saw it clearly. Anything that challenged her narrative felt unfair to her. The conversation spiraled after that. She cried. She accused. She begged. Then promised to change again. I'll do better. I'll give you space. Just don't leave. And this was the hardest part, because I wanted to believe her. But I finally understood something crucial. Even if she tried, even if she meant it, this dynamic would always return. Because it wasn't about behavior. It was about belief. She believed love meant constant closeness. And I needed autonomy to feel whole. Those two truths couldn't coexist. So I said it. I'm leaving. The room went silent. Not peaceful. Frozen. Her face collapsed. So that's it, she whispered. I nodded. I can't be who you need me to be without losing myself. She said something then, something that confirmed everything. If you really loved me, you wouldn't do this. And instead of breaking me, freed me, because I finally saw the trap clearly. Love that demands self-erasure isn't love. I left that night, not triumphantly, not relieved, just hollow. I sat in my car afterward, hands shaking, wondering if I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. The aftermath hit hard. Messages, calls, long texts explaining her pain. I didn't respond right away, not to punish her, but because I needed to hear my own thoughts for once. The guilt was brutal. Every instinct told me to fix it, to comfort her, to go back. But something else was growing stronger. Clarity. I realized something uncomfortable. If I went back now, I'd be teaching her that my boundaries were negotiable, and teaching myself that my needs were optional. So I stayed gone, and that's when the real healing began. The first thing that surprised me after I left was how loud the silence felt. Not peaceful silence, not calming silence, the kind that echoes. I woke up the next morning alone. No good morning text, no check-in message, no emotional temperature to read. At first, my body panicked. I reached for my phone without thinking, then stopped myself. There was no one to update anymore, no one to reassure, no one to manage, and somehow, that felt terrifying. I didn't realize how addicted I had become to being needed. The first few days felt like withdrawal, not from her, but from the role I played in the relationship. The fixer, the stabilizer, the emotional anchor. Without that role, I didn't know who I was supposed to be. I kept expecting a wave of relief, something dramatic. Instead, I felt empty, not lonely exactly, just unoccupied. My evenings were suddenly mine, and I didn't know what to do with them. I sat on my couch one night, controller in my hands, TV on, and for the first time in months, I played without checking my phone. No countdown timer in my head, no anticipation of emotional consequences. Just play. Halfway through, I paused, not because of guilt, but because I noticed something strange. My shoulders were relaxed. I hadn't realized how tense I had been for so long. That's when I understood something important. Peace doesn't always feel good at first. Sometimes it feels unfamiliar. The loneliness hit in waves, usually at night. That's when doubt showed up. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe I should have tried harder. Maybe this is just what relationships are like. Those thoughts were relentless. And then the messages started again. Long texts, emotional breakdowns, apologies mixed with accusations. I miss you. I can't sleep. I don't understand how you could do this. Every message triggered the same instinct. Fix it. But I resisted, not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood something. Comforting her now would reopen the door, and I wasn't strong enough to walk away twice. So I stayed quiet, and that silence taught me more than any argument ever had. Days passed, then weeks. The guilt slowly softened. I started noticing things again. The way sunlight came through my window, how good it felt to cook without rushing, how much energy I had left at the end of the day. I reconnected with friends I had neglected, not dramatically, just casually, and none of them demanded explanations. They just welcomed me back. That alone made me emotional, because I realized how conditional my world had become before. Here's the plot twist no one talks about. Leaving didn't make me lonely. It revealed how lonely I already was. Lonely while being constantly accompanied. That realization stung. But it also healed something deep inside me. One night, I caught myself smiling alone. Not at anything specific, just feeling okay. And immediately, I felt a flicker of guilt. That old reflex. But this time, I didn't push the feeling away. I sat with it and asked myself something new. Why do I believe peace needs permission? That question changed everything. Because I realized I had spent so long equating love with tension. That calm felt undeserved. But love isn't supposed to keep you on edge. And the more distance I gained, the clearer everything became. I saw the relationship not as a failure, but as a lesson in boundaries. I learned that being constantly chosen means nothing if you're never allowed to choose yourself. And as the weeks went on, the silence stopped feeling loud, started feeling like space. Space to think, space to breathe, space to exist without justification. And that's when I knew I wasn't broken by leaving. I was recovering. But the story wasn't over yet. Months passed after the breakup. Not quickly, not neatly. Time didn't heal everything all at once. Soften things, layer by layer. The first real update came quietly. One day I realized I hadn't checked my phone in hours. Not because I was distracted, but because I was content. That's when it hit me. Peace had become normal. I no longer flinched when my phone buzzed. I no longer felt the urge to explain where I was, or justify why I needed time alone. My life had stopped feeling like a performance. I noticed how my body had changed. I slept better. I laughed more easily. I didn't feel like I was constantly behind on someone else's expectations. That constant low-level anxiety. The one I thought was just part of being in a relationship. It was gone, and that's when clarity finally arrived. Not the kind that makes you angry, but the kind that makes you honest. I could finally look back at the relationship without defending it or demonizing her. She wasn't a villain, and I wasn't a victim. We were two people with incompatible ideas of love. She believed love meant merging completely. I believed love meant choosing each other without losing ourselves. Neither belief is evil, but only one allows both people to breathe. I started dating again eventually, slowly, cautiously, and that's when the contrast became impossible to ignore. The first time someone said, "Go have fun with your friends," and actually meant it, I felt confused. The first time someone didn't take my need for space personally, I waited for the guilt to follow. It didn't. That's when I realized how warped my baseline had become. I had learned to associate love with pressure, attention with obligation, closeness with sacrifice of self. And unlearning that took time. Here's the lesson that took the longest to accept. Love that needs constant reassurance will eventually consume reassurance without ever feeling full. No amount of time, no amount of effort, no amount of self-erasure will fix someone else's fear of abandonment. That work has to come from within them. I also learned something uncomfortable about myself. I stayed longer than I should have. Not because I didn't see the problem, but because I didn't want to be the bad guy. I confused endurance with kindness, and guilt with loyalty. But real loyalty includes loyalty to yourself. If I could speak to the version of me from episode 1, the guy calculating his life in percentages, I tell him this: if someone only notices what you don't give, they're blind to who you already are, and love that requires you to disappear isn't love you can live inside. The final update is simple. I'm happier now. Not euphoric, not perfect, just grounded. I have time for my friends, time for myself, and space for future relationships that don't feel like survival exercises. Sometimes I think about her, not with anger, but with understanding. I hope she finds peace, the kind that doesn't depend on another person's constant presence. And I'm grateful, not for the pain, but for the clarity it forced on me. Because now I know what healthy love feels like. It feels calm. It feels mutual. It feels like choice, not obligation. And if you're listening to this story, wondering whether your need for space makes you selfish, let me leave you with this. Wanting time to yourself doesn't mean you love someone less. It means you're still a whole person, and the right relationship will never ask you to shrink. It will ask you to stay as yourself.